Hello, here we are once again with Mookie Tenembaum. As you know, we are exploring through these videos his disillusionist philosophy, focusing on the misalgic theory about human behavior as aversion to suffering. And today we're going to discuss a subject that might sound counterintuitive to some as a problem for disillusionism and misalgic theory, which is the subject of generosity. Generosity is usually considered altruistic and pro-social, but we are going to take a look at generosity from a disillusionist, misalgic point of view and see what happens.
Well, it's the surprising anatomy of generosity. I'm being mysterious now. The mystery of generosity, we would call it, the mystery. Let's begin with describing generosity. Generosity needs at least 3 actors. Okay, they don't have to exist in real existence. One of them, the generous one, do. The rest could even be fictional, but normally are 3 people: the guy who gives, let's say, money, the guy who gives money, the guy who is receive it, and the guy who is going to be the witness of that, not the actual witness, but will get the knowledge of that. And it is to him, to the third party, we are aiming. Generosity is, in criminal law, if you kill somebody intentionally, yes, what happens if I try to shoot you and I hit somebody else? Then it's not intentional. The answer is criminal law has a rule that if my intention was to you, I can transfer that intention to the other person. Okay, so to the real victim. So this works the same way. It looks like I'm aiming it to you, but it goes to the third or fourth or fifth party. Now, I could be generous with God and build a memorial for Mother Mary. I don't know, something. I don't even think. But in general, I will be generous toward the person. But who is going to be the witness? Well, in general, it's people. But it could be your God, or it could be your moral conscience. It could be anything. Why am I saying this? Because once we'll see the anatomy of generosity, this description will make sense, a lot of sense. There is a stoic component to generosity. Now, it is not really a component, but an expectation. To me, to believe that you are generous, I have to believe that you help a third party, and that third party needed what we did. Again, you have several conditions. One, the person needs it. Yes, it's not that you go to Warren Buffett and you give him $5. That wouldn't be generous. It would be generous for 2 reasons. One, because Warren Buffett doesn't need $5, and the other because that did not cost you. Okay, so it has to be perceived like you are ready to suffer something for somebody else. Because normally you are doing your suffering, your suffering catalog, yes, is all about you. Yes, it's still all about you. But it has, but once I am being generous, I am being seen as ready to suffer something for somebody else. That's stoic. It's a condition. If not, there is no perceived generation. And generosity. Generosity is all about perception. It's all about perception. In fact, it's perception of perception. The guy who is being generous has perception that the other third party will see him as generous. It could be a lie. It could be all false. You could say you don't have any money and you gave him money and you're a billionaire. Or it could be, but once the facts are being accepted as such, generosity has to have that component of stoic. When I mean stoic, I mean suffering for somebody else. Yes, like Jesus, the whole idea of Jesus being suffering for somebody else. Look, they even have to make a God out of that. So God is suffering for somebody else in Christianity.
I read analysis in which the success of religion is related to the size of the sacrifices involved. and Christianity has this terrible sacrifice by the Christ, but every other religion includes its own amounts of sacrificial instances, terrible sacrifices.
God wants sacrifice. That's the message. Yes, you have to. If you love him, if you love him, look, generosity and love very close. If you love him, it must be pure. It must be nothing. It has to be, and you are supposed to suffer, to go to church every Sunday and listen to the idiot. Sorry, to the.
But don't make me laugh. You made the connection between generation and generosity. There is a connection between what's sacred and what's sacrificial. It's this is very close. Now, you said at least two important things, right? To be perceived as generous, first, the act has to be perceived, and not only by those who are the beneficiaries of the act, but by third parties that acknowledge the act as generous. So it's essentially gregarious, it's essentially involving first order and second order interactions. And it has to involve some sense of sacrifice, some sense of suffering from the one acknowledged as generous. So it's not any situation that can be labeled as generous.
Well, no, and this is exactly the point. You to be generous, you have to the sequence that I spoke about. If you know, you may try to be perceived as generous and not being successful. This is very important. We're talking about what we try to do, yes. And then they say, no, you have too much money. That was you're not generous. You are not being generous because you help that person, but not another one. I mean, this is you just rolling the dice, and you hope that it will work. You have a knowledge that your dice tend to come out with the one more often than others, with the number one more often than others, and then, but that's it. The dice still roll. I want to explain what are those sufferings that, why are we ready to do that? And the answer is because that suffering that we are ready to endure, in case that it's true, yes, that we're ready to endure, that suffering we're ready to endure to help a third person is really a payment for a bigger suffering you're trying to avoid. It's a vaccine. The pain of the vaccine, going to the place, they give you vaccine, sometimes you even get a fever, but then you don't get the flu. Yes, or you are not going to die from the flu. That's the business we're doing, yes, when we take a vaccine. This is a vaccine. It is generosity. In fact, if you are trying to pay something, that will not be seen as generous. Generous has to be spontaneous or perceived as spontaneous. Everything is perception in this story.
Good.
So what could be the motivations? Well, one motivation could be shame, to avoid the future shame.
Of course.
If I'm going to be generous, I am already given, I am on the plus side, on the other side. So the next time something happens, I still are at least zero. So that's what I will be doing. So it is shame or scorn, anything that is social, that comes from the outside. But then you have also the feeling of love. That is not generosity. If I help my children, I'm not being generous. For two reasons. One, because everybody has their children. Some more, some less, but nobody's being called generous.
No surprise involved.
Not surprise involved. The second reason why this will not be perceived is because when you are doing it out of love, you are being impulsive, but not of generosity, but you are really being driven by another sentiment. It could be empathy, could be anything. The moment there is a not a requirement, but a very good, a preferred condition is that this generosity has to be clean, pure, zero. And then the most important one, you may be generous because of God. It doesn't have to be a person or your dog. I mean, you can be anything, or your dead mother, or Moses, Jesus. or even your own moral conscience. And that's what normally works. Because you don't want to feel guilt, you're generous. What I'm trying to say, Florencio, is that the generosity is not altruistic. But we'll talk about it in a moment. I want to hear your opinion on that.
No. I was thinking about the different possible witnesses. It could even be posterity. It could even be the
of course,
illusion of generations to come looking back at you as someone generous. But it's still the same argument, right? I'm not doing it alone, and I am not doing it selflessly. In fact, I am running away from some of these perceived sources of suffering, even if I'm doing it in advance, even if the suffering is not here yet. I'm not addressing a guilt or a shame that I already felt, but some that might be awaiting for me in the future.
Yes, in fact, you don't know what's awaiting to you in the future. That's the reason that the suffering you're running away many times is just fear, and that is a good reason. What I'm trying to say, and here I want to be clear, the disillusionist thought does not contemplate good or bad. There is no such a thing as good or bad. No, there is facts. Those are, it is not good or bad that you're trying to run away from suffering and thus you help other people. Certainly not for the person being helped. He doesn't care why you're doing it. Yes, and unless you're trying to con them, to put your hand in their pocket. Unless you're trying to do that, he doesn't care. I mean, the result is there. But we do not do anything in life, anything that is not motivated from our running away from suffering. Everything we do, and especially that 95% of the day, 90% of the day in which we are sleepwalking. So, and here I want to add another thing. If you are generous, but while sleepwalking, let's say I give a certain amount, monthly amount that goes directly from my credit card to the Red Cross. Let's imagine that. That is not considered generous. That is almost an obligation. And of course, there is the other side. I'm not generous when I'm paying taxes, because if I don't pay taxes, I go to prison. And I certainly not being generous by handing my wallet to somebody pointing me with a gun. I'm not being generous. So look, it has to be perceived as not compulsory, as an election, because it looks like you're ready to suffer for somebody else, like Jesus, and you are not. You are really, what you're doing is that's what I say. Altruism is a myth. There is no such a thing as altruism. Let me point it to make it more succinct. We are born alone, we suffer alone, and we die alone. The word lonely, I didn't use the word lonely. Alone, that's the fact. Lonely is a feeling. This is the fact. Everything we do is running away from suffering, which you do it alone. Then it's the interaction. Listen, I don't say that generosity does not help society or people doing well. I just said people who are the receptors of generosity should be happy. But I want to take you an example. You were talking about posterity. Let me talk to you about posterity. Some people get posterity. They think what they will think of me after I die. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and other peoples of the pledge, all of them are doing something they have posterity now. What they do is they say, I will give all my money after I'm dead. That's not your money, let me remind you. I will give the money of my children. Oh, I can also give your money. I have no problem with that. I can give all your money to somebody else. It's your money. It's not their money. It's the money of the heirs. Of course, he could do it. But again, I don't care, because even the generosity, the person who jumps on a grenade is not being generous. I think I'm very clear about it. He is running away from another suffering. And that must have been perceived like a very big suffering.
That's a big one.
That's a big one.
The pledge case it's easy enough, right? Because it's all benefit and no harm.
Oh no, they get posterity today. You understand? Without giving a cent, nothing. Not even a cent.
Now, we are almost out of time, but two things stand out clearly for me. First, all these positive expressions, usually in Latin for some reason, usually connected to some solemnity and epics that only Latin has in our culture. Pro bono, pro deo, ad honorem. Yes. They all mask the fact that we are running away from suffering, right?
But the closest one is ad honorem, for the honor.
Yes. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. What is the honor? How much is important your honor? I will look at it, see how much are you ready to sacrifice. Again, you are maybe very good at sacrificing little and getting a lot. That's there is leverage in this. But this is a vaccine. The whole process is the process of a vaccine. I vaccinate myself against scorn, against shame, so I get the people, the third parties, one or many, that message has to get to them. And let me remind everybody, that's what you intend. Many times you fail. Yes, it's still the same reason. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if somebody really enjoys the money you gave them. It's not important. What's important from this video is where it comes from. We are not going towards somebody, pro bono, pro deo, but from something. And that's suffering.
Contra phobos, anti-phobos, running away from fear, right? But in 2 minutes, I think we should try to leave here the idea that we discussed while preparing the video, and it's slipped our mind thus far, which is the idea of hacks, right? Yes. This is an amazing way of hacking into people's behavior.
This is a vulnerability.
Maybe the preferred way of hacking in our culture, right?
Yes, again, remember that it depends how it happens and where it happens. But in general, if generosity that's being demanded, like with a gun, is not generosity. So here comes a person and tells you, you have to be generous. Now you have a problem. Why? Because if you're not generous, you are nothing. You are not on the radar. You are under the radar. But now the choice is being perceived as generous or disgenerous or whatever you want to call it, stingy. It doesn't matter. These two, or egoist. Oh, then there's the word, the E word. The E word is like the worst. You are an egoist. No, he's just being a little animal trying to survive and being afraid of dying. That's it. And doesn't like pain. That's what you are. Nothing else. Nothing more. But what you are saying, the hacking, is people really hack that vulnerability. They use that vulnerability to make you do things. And the problem with that is that there is an immediate perceived punishment if you don't do it. So if somebody says you have to be generous, it's almost like, again, it doesn't matter. So now you're running away from that suffering, from the suffering of people thinking you are stingy. It doesn't matter. It's always the same thing.
It's still a flight.
There is no good, there is no bad. I'm describing. This is nothing more than describing what we have.
Good. We'll carry on with the description in the next video.
Absolutely.
Thank you. See you next time.
See you next time.
If you enjoyed the video, please like it, comment and subscribe.